our goal is not to go for the contract right away, but it's to understand if they have a problem we can solve, right? And then to demonstrate or communicate that to the right person internally to get them to say, all right, let's set up a meeting, let's learn a little bit more, right? And start building that trust factor, especially with the large corporates that maybe don't know who you are. So again, it comes down to doing your homework and then being able to actually identify who within the organization you need to be speaking to, which is a tricky thing, especially at large corporates, but we've got some ways around that and around identifying the right individual or getting to a decision maker in order to open up that conversation.
Hello, Profit First entrepreneurs and thought leaders. I am so excited, very excited and very proud to be part of this conversation that we're going to have today. Today is our 100th episode. It's our 100th episode. And I am so happy and excited and proud that we have made it to this point. It's interesting because when I first started this podcast, I never thought about a 100th episode. I never thought that we'd have a 100th episode, never thought where this podcast would go. And now we're in the top 25% of podcasts. So I am super excited, super honored to have you as a listener. And, I couldn't help but think, what is more important topic to have right now, right? But the topic of really diversification and really creating supplier diversity within our companies as we grow our companies, right? Because in this century, you're not going to grow an enterprise alone, right? It's going to take reaching across the table, meeting new hands, shaking hands with people you've never met, and really growing by collaboration, right? In this particular century. And I am so pleased that we have a special guest today, and his name is Carl Sona. And Carl is, very dear to my heart. He is a rainmaker for small and mid-sized companies. He's been doing this for over a decade. He's the CEO and founder of the Cast Company, where they really specialize in really creating business development strategies that help minority business enterprises really grow and scale. Now, I understand that we have a large audience that isn't minority, and we welcome you for this conversation too, because this is a very important conversation, right? Because really, one, a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about today that's applicable for minority-owned businesses is going to be applicable to your business. And the reality to grow and scale in this century, right? It's important to be able to reach more people, to shake more hands, to create those suppliers that really are going to allow you to shine. So I'm so excited today that we get to talk with Carl from the Cast Company, and we're going to talk about supplier diversity, and we're going to talk about how do you grow and scale in this century, and also how do you get those really large contracts, and how do you network in a room where nobody looks like you. So please join me and welcoming Carl Sona to the platform. Hey, Carl, how are you doing today?
Hey, Suzanne, I'm doing so well. Thank you so much for having me here. It's a pleasure to spend some time with both you and your lovely audience and community.
Well, we're excited, so we're going to have this conversation kind of split into two parts.
Sure.
We're going to talk about why diversity is good for business, right? No matter where you are, minority owned or not. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to talk to our minority owned businesses, and we're going to talk about how do you get those big SEC contracts, right? And how to land those. And if you guys that are non-minorities, listen in, you might learn something, right?
Hopefully a thing or two.
So Carl, first of all, let's talk about diversity. Let's talk about why diversity, especially in the procurement sector, is good for small business, good for mid-sized business.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And like I was just telling you offline, I like to keep it fairly simple. And, aside from it being the right thing to do, amidst all of these social injustice and a lot of the, I'd say, civil unrest we saw a couple years ago that we're still kind of feeling and reeling from, it makes good business sense to mid-market or mid-sized companies because it gives them a gamut of options in terms of qualified and vetted suppliers and vendors that they can plug into their value chain and their supply chain in order to deliver better quality products, goods, and services to their consumers. Think about it this way. We saw so many companies during the COVID pandemic that struggled from a supply chain perspective, right? And that are still reeling and trying to figure out if they can get things made domestically or, who they can go to continue operations and business as usual. And the thing that we saw a lot of companies that became savvy to the economic side of supplier diversity realized is that, oh, wow, I'd say out of every 6 businesses that are being started, 5 out of those 6 are being started by minority-owned companies. They are now quickly becoming the majority in the market in terms of goods and services that are being manufactured or rendered, how do we start to identify these companies, engage with them, and really learn how they can fit into what we do so we have more options to choose from? That way we're not overly reliant on just a handful of businesses that we've been doing, business with just because that's all we know, right? So from the mid-market perspective, greater options that definitely leads to, I'd say, more efficient processes in the back end. And then obviously from the small business side of things, the number one thing that a lot of organizations see when they establish supplier diversity programs is the economic development as a result of those programs being established. So what do we actually mean by that, right? Well, what we mean is that when a small company has an opportunity to work with a larger mid-market, for instance, they now have opportunities to grow their labor force, right? They have employment opportunities in the communities where it is that they operate that create jobs, and those jobs circulate spending power, right? That spending power can actually help with taxes, which is a huge issue here in this country. And you look at a lot of the communities where these small businesses are, oftentimes they're underrepresented, right? So they're the ones that are struggling with things like the digital divide or poor infrastructure and things of this nature. So we actually have an opportunity to create a multiplier effect that can be reinvested back into our communities to help us create just, a better day-to-day quality of life for all involved. So those are just a couple of things, off the top that make this something that makes fiscal sense.
I love it, right? When we all do better, right? It's a tide, right? We rise, right? When all of us rise. What did I say? A rising tide lifts all boats, right? Isn't that the saying?
Yep, that's exactly.
That standby?
That's exactly what we used to say at my old company. A rising tide raises all ships, and that's. I'm happy you brought that up, Suzanne. That's one of the things that I really work hard to help corporates or even mid-market companies understand is that supplier diversity. It's not about a handout. It's not about a philanthropic thing where you stroke a check and you just turn around and you just continue on as normal. It's really about keeping those companies more sustainable and increasing the competitiveness of America altogether. Understanding that minorities, whether you look at the employment side or the diverse business side, are quickly becoming the majority in the market. And so if we don't find a way to allow these organizations to participate, in a manner that I would say meets their representation in the market, what are we really doing for all of us together as a whole, right? Like we're kind of treading on really, really rocky water. So I think there's something there to take away also.
I love the fact that, I know in the beginning of the podcast, we talked about what is a certification, what is an MWBE certification. And it's 51% owned by either a minority or woman-owned entity, right? And it's interesting because when you go through those certifications, it's not like just because you're a woman or just because you're a minority, you get to get certified, right? They actually vet you. They interview your clients. They look at your financial statements. Can you handle a multi-million-dollar client or, let's go into the billions. Can you handle that type of contract? And they interview you. They interview your clients. They look at your licenses, right? So you're actually more, I hate to say this as a minority, that saying has been, you have to work twice as hard just to be considered equal, right, out there. But, that certification, it's not an easy thing to get. So if you're getting a certified minority or woman-owned business, you're getting someone that's licensed, who's competent, whose clients have been interviewed. You're not getting your cousin from like down the block. You're getting, I hate to say this, someone that has worked twice as hard probably to get where they are.
Right, 100%. The certification process, a bit controversial, if you speak to some minority-owned companies, because it can feel like a whole lot of work for not a whole lot of results, right? And I try to work with minority-owned companies to see how that's more of a limiting mindset, if anything, and how we need to be playing the longer game, if you will, because what certification is intended to do, and I think that the process definitely needs to be a lot more streamlined, but that's neither here nor there. But what it's intended to do is to verify that you are who you say you are. Understanding that there have been a number of shell companies and front companies that have been stood up, right, posing as certified and minority owned, but are actually owned and operated by somebody in the majority, right? And so that's business that potentially is being taken off your plate and being given to a false mirage. And so we're seeing a lot of diverse owned companies, really kind of teeter totter as to whether or not it's worth their time. And, I'm working with some colleagues in this platform that we're building to help connect minorities to corporations, to help streamline the process, but more importantly, to teach minorities about how it's a leverageable tool. Because what we're seeing is that for those that do get certified and that feel like it was a waste of time, quite often they're not really aware of how they're supposed to position the certification to hopefully streamline getting them to the front of the line in order to be considered from a procurement standpoint. So it's all about knowledge, right? It's all about, understanding what it is you don't know and finding somebody that has that information to make the meaningful progress that you want to see.
I love it. Love it.
Yeah.
One of the things that I hear from business owners, right? Sure. And sometimes minority business owners, sometimes, a lot of time non-minority business owners is they don't know where they want to support, right? Businesses that are minority owned or women owned, but they don't know where to find them. And they're afraid of quality. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about that head on. How do you find them? And let's talk about people. Let's talk about, are they equal?
This is a big challenge in the market right now. And it's one that I hear all the time on both sides. From the minority side, it's, well, I don't know what more I can do to try to be visible, right? And the corporate side, it's exactly what you just said. And what we have to do is we have to really just sort of strip away all of the fluff, all of the fancy acronyms and certification talk, et cetera, and get to the core of how business is done, right? And business is typically done with individuals that you have a relationship with, right? Like that whole know, like, and trust factor. So when you ask me the question, Suzanne, to keep it very simple, if you're a mid-market company and you're starting to really kind of think about how this could make sense from a sustainability standpoint, start in your local community, right? Start in your local community. Most likely than not, there's a chamber of commerce, or maybe there's even a local minority supplier diversity council, right? That is essentially an advocacy group on behalf of minority and women-owned businesses. If you can get involved with the group leaders of your local chapter or what have you, you can start building those relationships and helping them understand who you are and what you're looking for out of a viable partner. So that's definitely one thing that, a lot of mid-market companies can do. Now, on the diverse supplier side, the challenge we see is that, especially for those that have been certified, there's a really weird false misconception that, all right, once I'm certified, I'm magically on the list and I'm bumped up and my work is done. No. Would you expect to invest in a piece of marketing, and not leverage the marketing to actually gain the business, right? Like it just doesn't work. And so what we try to do with those folks is we try to really help them understand what their unique value proposition is. What is it that you feel like you do better than a large majority of the market? And then we try to actually help them understand what business they're in and who it is they serve. You'd be surprised that a lot of small businesses can't actually communicate that in a very clear and effective way, right? It's the old elevator pitch. And so once we've actually helped them master those two pieces, we are now working with this new platform that we call Supply Chain Connect to actually help them create, produce, and distribute original content, video content that can actually be pushed out to corporations who may have those needs currently or who may be looking for some of those needs in the near future. So it's a very exciting project in that, we're working with a lot of the advocacy groups to bring corps to the table that are saying, we want to figure this out. And then we're helping the minority-owned businesses actually get their messaging dialed in order to help that, communication be a bit more effective once the buyers come to the table. So I guess that's a bit of a shameless plug, but I would really just encourage people to start locally where they are and look for the advocacy groups that exist because, they are there to help champion this cause.
Very, very true with that. I remember when I first started my business, I think, one of the first things someone told me was to go get certified. And I remember like going and networking and things like that. And I was like, there are no contracts coming to me. I'm
Yeah, yeah,
certified. And it was a hard process. And its reality is, contracts don't come to you just because, you get certified as a minority owned
yeah,
business, right? You have to
yeah,
market, you have to network, you have to get people to know you and see your work, right? With
yeah.
that happening. I remember when I did land our first government contract, it was actually not a minority contract at all. And I got it because I went to an RFP meeting. I randomly went to an RFP meeting. I just started my business. I knew the contract was way bigger than what I was, but I figured, hey, I would just sit in the back and like take notes and learn for next time. And I remember going to this RFP meeting, and first thing I was shocked was it wasn't this crowded room. There wasn't very many people there. I think it's maybe a couple, a handful of betters. And I remember like, I don't know what happened, but apparently, I shook a lot of hands. I was very intimidated, shook a lot of hands, was
Yeah.
very, very friendly. And someone took notice of me. And I didn't get the contract as a prime, but the prime said, you know what, we actually need your help,
Yes.
as a contractor. It's Texas. It was the biggest Republican government out there. But, it was because they saw my resume. They knew that I had the experience, right? I had worked for Anderson and KPMG. I knew what I was doing, and I let them know what I did. And so that's how that contract came into fruition there.
Oh, absolutely. And I think what you just described is a perfect example of just getting out and building relationships. So one of the things we tell minority-owned businesses to do is put together a very clear statement of capability, right? That undeniably helps somebody understand what you do. And do two things with that. One, try to identify some of the primes on these opportunities that you could potentially add value to. As you just mentioned, primes typically sub out a good amount of that work that they've won, right? In fact, if they're doing business with a larger organization that has a supplier inclusion program, there's probably a set aside requirement, right? And so how do you think about beginning to establish relationships with primes that are in your industry so that they know you and they become familiar with who you are? That way, when these opportunities come, you are well positioned. So I think, that's a golden example of just some of the business development and networking work. I know everybody hates the word networking, but I think it's quite effective when you actually know who it is you can actually help. And that takes a little bit of, back end work. And that's something that my firm does help companies with, is the research, the market intelligence, and how that, potentially can be leveraged to allow you to demonstrate value. It's all about value at the end of the day,
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. It's about value. And, Carl, we're living in the great resignation right now, right? The
Yeah.
great resignation. And I don't care who you are, everybody's having labor shortages, right? So it's even more important now to find partners, right, that can allow you to shine, right? Even in the midst
Yes.
of a staff shortage, make sure you can meet those deadlines. And so looking at maybe a business that, maybe that person has a lot of experience, but, they're just getting started in a business, and saying, hey, maybe we can collaborate on a project together. Maybe we can use your labor, some of your team's labor, in order to subsidize the bigger contract out there.
Yes. And that's something that a lot of larger organizations actually like to see. Second to maybe not knowing where to go to find these companies, I'd say even if the corporate does find the company or the mid-market does find the company, usually the next point of contention is, can they actually follow through? And I know for some of the minorities out there listening, that can maybe feel like a bit of a dig, but think about it this way. If you take on that work somehow, some way, you get that opportunity and you actually can't follow through because you don't have the infrastructure or the labor or whatever is required, you now leave a stain in the minds of those larger corporations, right? That now maybe affects the way they look at other minorities out there. So it's actually a huge, responsibility, right, that we have to do the work and to do it as we represent ourselves. But to my initial point, there's a huge opportunity right now. I like to say we're in the partner economy. There's a huge opportunity for joint ventures, for specific contracting opportunities, strategic alliances, and things, but things in that sort of world. And I think, back to our previous conversation, it requires networking. It requires understanding who's out in the market that's a complement to what you do, and approaching folks and just starting to have the conversations well before it's ever really time, for relative to when the deal comes. So I can't overemphasize the need to just be aware of what you do and how what you do fits into another company's plans. And that's a little bit about what we're trying to also help streamline on this platform that we're building out.
Love it. Now, I know a lot of our audience may not be minority-owned businesses.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that I am getting a lot of questions about from my non-minority clients is, how do I get a government contract? Especially like in this economy, like, oh, they got stable money in the government. I want to get one of those. And a lot of those government contracts, right, are going to require, you have to have a minority subcontractor, whether in your business or in a complementary business. A lot of times they'll say 5% needs to go to, of this contract needs to go to a minority business. So it's important to build those relationships with someone, so that when you go to bed, you're not just looking at you and who your partners are and who your managers are and who your expertise is. They're looking at who your subcontractors' managers are and what experience did they bring to the table and how powerful are you as a team too with that.
Yeah, no, and I think, for those larger organizations that are chasing, the government awards, it's also about getting very, very clear about, what your core competency is and what it is not, and really focusing on maybe, where you feel like you are a bit lacking because it's just not your core expertise, and spending time in those dedicated spaces, right? Chasing down those industries. And again, starting to leverage the advocacy groups that are out there and a variety of different databases and platforms that can help you unearth who some of these companies are that can help you shore the gap, right? So again, the partnership economy is even more so critical now because of the great resignation that we're seeing and folks just going into business for themselves, or I don't know, trading Bitcoin all day, whatever that is. But
I think some people can make more money trading Bitcoin all day, right? I did not give you investment advice there. Check with your investment advisor on that. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. Let's talk about navigating the room, right? Because when I think about my place as a minority-owned business, my experience, and I've seen other minority owned businesses too navigate the room. I can't speak for a non-minority, but I have seen cases where people that look like each other flock together, right? So let's talk about navigating the room and being inclusive to get to know other people and find out what they have in that room. Let's talk about how do you do that, Carl?
Yeah. It can be a challenging thing, but the thing that I always try to keep in mind is that I am not my color. And being a man, a Black male, a person of color, I have in my mind a unique opportunity to show them something different, relative to whatever biases or preconceived notions they may have. So I want to start there, Susanne, because it's a challenge, but I think if we can flip this thing on its head and say, okay, my color doesn't necessarily have to be the limiting factor that keeps me withheld. In fact, it can help me position myself as something different, right? Just that little mindset shift has always helped me walking into predominantly white rooms, which I still do to this day, right? So aside from the mindset thing, you have to understand your value. You have to understand your value. And what I mean by that is you'll hear me a lot on some of the programs we do talk about how what you do helps other people. And for a lot of bigger corporations or even mid-markets, that's typically cost reduction, it's typically quality improvement, right? Deliverability, flexibility. These are all things that add value to them and their organization, long-term speaking. And so it's about understanding who potentially could be in the room, right? And doing some diligence and some research there, and being able to craft a very specific statement that speaks to how you can help them. So if you and I were to walk in a room and, let's pretend that you are somebody of influence that doesn't happen to look like me, that I'd like to see if I can even help. I may walk up to you and I may say, hey, Susanne, how are you? And we engage in some friendly discourse. But then I'm going to pivot the conversation to how I could potentially help you. And that's typically with a problem statement. So I may say something along the lines of, hey, Suzanne, you know how a lot of accounting firms typically lose 10 to 15% and sometimes get frustrated because of inefficient business practices, when it comes to tax time? Well, what we do as an organization is we actually help accountants like that with XYZ. You want to reframe what you do and the problem associated with it to how you can help the person that you're talking to. That way, you can give them a frame of reference for whether or not they can actually see you fitting into their lives. Because let's be honest, aside from color or what have you, everybody only really cares about who you are and if you're somebody that can actually help them. Like, should they care about who you are, right? And so for minority businesses in particular, when we operate under the false assumption that because we're certified and because we look a certain type of way, we should automatically get the business, that can sometimes be a turnoff in those rooms. Understanding that the bias is, oh, there's some sort of a quota or there's some sort of a handout. We don't want to do that. We want to lead with value as much as possible. So the two things that I always use is, again, understanding that I'm a person of value. I can't help everybody, but if I understand my value, I can get to those that I can. And number two, doing a little bit of research on the room that I'm getting ready to walk into and having that problem statement crafted and ready to go so that they can actually qualify me and say, tell me more, or tell me how it is you would do that. All of a sudden you're in a conversation and you can start building that rapport, and it kind of goes from there.
I love that. And, I always tell people, especially in this economy, you will not grow a empire alone, right? It's going to be through partnerships. It's going to be through shaking hands. It's going to be through meeting strangers, right? And having conversations with strangers. That's how you're going to build your empire. Especially in this gig economy, right? You have to be a collaborator in order to really scale and grow. Whether you're recruiting, it's not going to be Indeed, right? Indeed, you get either 50,000 applicants or you get one that's qualified. But it's going to be, who do you know that can do this job, and building that network of people that you can trust, that you can rely on when you need them, right? It's going to be really important from that standpoint.
Yeah. I think the other piece of it too is kind of what we're doing here. Like, I don't know what inspired you to do this incredible podcast, right? But it's now a piece of your brand, right? It's a piece of your asset. It's a marketing collateral. It's a networking opportunity. It's so many different things, right? That give you an asset to leverage in some of those rooms. And so I say that to say, hey, here is a strategic item that people can potentially think about taking action on. But two, for anybody that is in their head about whether or not they belong in that room. Because I know sometimes it's just a function of, I don't see anybody like me in that room. What the hell am I doing in here? Maybe I'm a little timid. Doing something like this, being known for something that you can point to, should hopefully give you some internal confidence in terms of what you bring to the table, because this is very valuable here. And so I encourage people to think about what that is on both sides. How do you want to be perceived? How do you want to be known in your marketplace? And think about how you can put that image out there in a way that can actually be consumed.
I love that. And I always say too, it starts with being a nice person, right? It starts with, how do you meet a new friend? You start with saying hello, right? And hello means I have to put it off. I can't think about how you're going to judge me, right? Because I said hello. And it's just being a friendly person, shaking a hand, and sometimes when people don't respond, right, when you first walk in a room and nobody's approaching you and coming over and going, oh, you're so adorable, the most important person in the world just walked in, it's not necessarily about you. Just knowing that it might not be about you. Maybe that person in that room is busy. They just saw somebody they haven't seen in a decade and they're super excited to see that person. Maybe that person had a bad day. Maybe they couldn't find parking or they missed their bus, but they needed to be there. But not taking that first initial strange interaction, if that would happen, right? Not taking it personal. That person isn't ready to talk to you. That's fine. Go to the next person, right? And just keep going to that next person. If that room is not friendly, go to another room, right? But it starts with, don't take it personal. And it just starts with hello.
Yeah. And to be quite frank, it only takes one. So if you're a young company looking for a big contract, or if you're a mid-market company looking for your first potential minority-owned joint venture or what, it just takes one. Understanding that we all have secondary and tertiary networks, right? And so be less concerned about what you just said. Be less concerned about everybody flocking to you or whatever, and be more concerned about finding that one. Keep it simple.
And I love that. And just having the heart to serve, just like you said earlier, right? What can I give you? What can I leave you that makes your day better or your life better than what it was 2 seconds before you met me?
Yeah. Just kind of common sense stuff. And, from the mid-market side, I know you talked on earlier about, a lot of these companies maybe feeling like it's time to do something or to get in the game with the minority-owned companies. I like to encourage those companies to come at it from a place of, yes, it's the right thing to do, sure. But all of that's just a one-sided clap. Like, really come at it from the place of, how can these companies make us more competitive, right? And I think about the art of competition as being what really fuels our capitalistic world, right? And I don't say that to turn a cheek away from the right thing or the moral thing, but I think we can all agree that the one color we are all chasing is green. I mean,
it's gold now if it's Bitcoin, right?
Well, I guess it's gold now with the Bitcoin, right? But I mean, in terms of fiat, and so if I can help you make money, or if you can help me make money, and you happen to be of a different race or a different background, or socioeconomics, whatever, does it really matter? And that's really my whole goal with this whole economic inclusion thing, is to facilitate these relationships so that we can make money together, make lots of it, by providing impact, and see that, oh, wow, maybe we actually have a lot more in common than what we ever thought, So I guess that's my little rant there, but I just wanted to share that, for any of the companies that are maybe feeling like, we've never really done this before, are we going to look weird? Do we even know how to do it? No, go find a partner that will help you make some more money.
Exactly.
That's what it's about.
If you want to build an empire, you won't do it alone.
Yeah.
So, the more partners that that are going to make you shine that you have, the better off you're going to be with that. Absolutely. Very, very true. Now, one of the other questions that I get, Carl, is, and this is minority businesses, non-minority businesses, how do I get these contracts? How do I get a Coca-Cola contract? How do I get a United Airlines contract? And Carl, that's his specialty. He gets you those contracts. So, Carl, how do we get those contracts?
Yeah, the contract is what we all want, right? The contract is what we all want. I think first and foremost, it's about building the right relationships internally with your procurement officials in that specific Fortune 500. So you mentioned Coca-Cola. One of the first things that I would be doing, as a mid-market or minority, whatever, is I would be reading annual and quarterly reports from a Coca-Cola. And almost always in those reports, you're getting an opportunity to really understand where the organization currently is, because they're reporting, how they did from a P&L standpoint and all that good stuff. But you're also getting a snapshot of where it is that they're going. And I bring up this approach because all too often it's typically ignored. People want to just sort of sit by the telephone and wait for an RFP call or whatever. If you're listening to this, you're probably already doing that. I'm giving you a more strategic and I would say precise way to go about it, right? And so once you can read those reports and you understand where earnings were, you understand maybe where the company struggled or where they'd like to go, and you can do some diligence and say, oh wow, Coca-Cola really needs, a new packaging manufacturer. We do packaging in this regional area. I wonder if potentially there's a fit here. Then it's about really understanding who within Coca-Cola oversees that from a first line of defense that you need to build some sort of a relationship with. And this is what we teach at the Cast Company. We teach how to actually strategically embark on this outreach so that you can lead with value from the get-go. And again, have that strategic sourcing manager or that decision maker understand what you do and how you could fit. Again, our goal is not to go for the contract right away, but it's to understand if they have a problem we can solve, right? And then to demonstrate or communicate that to the right person internally to get them to say, all right, let's set up a meeting, let's learn a little bit more, right? And start building that trust factor, especially with the large corporates that maybe don't know who you are. So again, it comes down to doing your homework. I mean, this is very simple stuff. And I apologize to your audience by making it sound overly simplified, but this is what we see that works. right? And then being able to actually identify who within the organization you need to be speaking to, which is a tricky thing, especially at large corporates, but we've got some ways around that and around identifying the right individual or getting to a decision maker in order to open up that conversation. So that would be some sound advice is look at those annual reports. There's a lot of hidden gems there. And a lot of CEOs and corporate executives right now are scratching their heads trying to figure out how to solve some of these problems. I mean, they literally are the visionary people. You'd be surprised as to how receptive they could be to a young company like you that gets what they need.
I love it. So start with the financial statements, like Carl says, and figure out what they're looking for. What's their next strategic growth area, and how can you be part of that initiative to make it better? It's where you start with that.
Yeah, because I would say, for a lot of us, we play this commodity type game. I mean, Susanne, how many, accounting firms are there out there, right? Like probably more than you and I could ever count. But there's something that makes your company special, right? Like there's something unique that you do. And so I think it's understanding that. And then it's looking for who in the market needs that as well to really sync the two up, right? In order to move the needle forward on what you do.
I love it. And, also find out where they're hanging out, right? The buyer, for me, it was that RFP meeting, right? At that one, but maybe there's an organization that you belong to, that they are part of, whether it be a procurement organization, if you're wanting to support procurement, accounting, maybe there's a controllers forum, a CFO forum that you need to go to.
Yes.
But where do you go? Where does your buyer, the user, right? User, where do they hang out?
Well, and these days, there are so many associations and sub-associations for almost every single integral part of the procurement process. So to your point, I think it's about figuring out what those associations are and being very clear about who you want to meet. The other issue that I see on both sides is I go to these things and who should I be meeting? And so we like to work with these organizations to help them build what we call a Dream 50 list. And this Dream 50 could be collaborators, it could be corporate buyers, it could be minority-owned companies, and and all of that plus more, right? But it's about getting really clear on who you'd like to meet and then reverse engineering the process. I mean, we have LinkedIn, which is a great tool. We've got a number of different platforms out there that can actually help us. Sounds kind of stalkerish, but follow these people online, to see how and when and even if, there might be something we can do together.
I love it. Love it. Yeah. Lots of really great wisdom there, Carl. One of the things that I like to ask our guests and audience as we wind down is if you could leave our audience with one piece of advice. It can be personal, it can be business related. What would that one piece of advice be?
It's a great question. I know you told me earlier that a lot of the audience is kind of in the mid-market space, I believe you said. So I guess we'll make it actionable for them. And I would say that, my piece of advice is probably more a question. And that question would probably be framed something a little like this is, what would you like the legacy for your company to be 25 to 30 years from now? What does that actually look like? And I position it that way because right now we are in a tremendous space of disruption, right? And so when you think about legacy, a lot of it boils down to how you will be remembered and if this company will even still be standing once you are gone, you know what I mean? And so with legacy, I think the companies and the organizations that, will forever stand the test of time are the ones that were willing to figure out what they needed to do to keep up and stay ahead of the times. And I think it's really, a difficult conversation at times because for a lot of companies that have been around and that are 30, 40, $50 million a year in revenue, it can be easy to feel like, well, we've already unlocked the recipe that's got us to a place of success. And I think that may be fine and well if you don't want to actually, continue to sustain, if not surpass that level of success for the next 30 years going forward. But understanding that things are changing, understanding that it's a partner economy, understanding that over $2 trillion worth of imports that we used to get from China are not coming back, and that you might have to find some different ways to engage in business. What do you want your legacy to be? And what side of history do you want to be on? So, I think it's just food for thought. Maybe that's something that the listeners can take back to, their colleagues and start to chat about a little, start to chat a little bit more about, because I think there's a tremendous opportunity for those that actually want to soul search and figure out what that needs to be in order to sustain, growth going forward.
I love it. What side of history do you want to be on?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, the progressive side or the side that fell back? I love it. Love it. Yeah. Love it. Love it. And Carl, all of us are looking to get bigger contracts, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Bigger, better, and grow and scale. How do we contact you to work with you to do that?
Yeah. Thank you for asking so much. There's a number of ways to get a hold of me. I'm very, very visible online. I would say first and foremost, the listeners can feel free to send me an email. I'm Carl at dearblackceo.com. That's Carl with a K, so I'm sure we'll have that somewhere below here. And also feel free to visit the website. That's just carlsona.com. And if you head to the page that says The Cast Company, you'll learn a lot more about what we do and how it can help organizations that want to build, longstanding relationships with corporate buyers and ultimately get to the contracting opportunity.
I love it. I love it. A rising tide lifts all boats. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift or leave Carl's contact information in our show notes so that you'll be able to contact him, to work with him, and to grow your business.
The other opportunity that I will make available, just special for your audience, and you can take me up on it, you can leave it if you'd like, is we are launching a new platform to increase visibility for both mid-markets, Fortune 1000 companies, and small and minority-owned companies that ultimately seek to work with one another. And so if a company in your network would like to be featured on this platform, on this network, to kind of get the word out about who they are and what they do, they can feel free to send us an email, Carl at dearblackceo.com, and just in the subject line, write contract, and somebody from the team will reach out and talk to you about how we can potentially get that coordinated.
Love it. And we'll make sure we drop that in the show notes too, so everyone can get that contracts and get to work with Carl. Thank you so much for doing that.
Yeah, no, Susanne, thank you so much for, having me and just doing what you're doing, working to empower businesses across the entire spectrum. It's all very important.
Thank you. Well, we definitely appreciate your wisdom and all the golden nuggets that you're leaving with us today.
I appreciate you. Take care.
Thanks, Carl.